Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video, in episode 2 of Rugby League Conversations, I'm going to be yapping on about another topic. You might be thinking, what is the purpose of this? It's just an opportunity for me to ramble on about a topic and actually have other people listen to me rather than just saying it in my room with no one else here. You may also be thinking, we don't need another Rugby League podcast. Granted, I don't think there's that many anyway, but I just feel like rambling on about something, and so far, I just feel like talking about the Warrington Wolves. So in this video, I wanted to channel all my ramblings into Warrington Wolves Playmakers, and the reason for that is because I feel like it. So there are a few players I would consider as Warrington Wolves Playmakers that would go on a Mount Rushmore, if you will. There's 4 players that I can identify. Now, as rugby league fans, we can be quite negative. Whether it's about the stadiums that a test match is played at, whether it's the attendance, whether it's certain teams and transfers, all this kind of stuff. We can be quite a negative fan base for the sport, not just Warrington Wolves, but for the sport in general. But I wanted to kind of highlight and talk positively about experiences that I've had as a Wire fan, seeing certain playmakers throughout the last couple of years, and that's what I'm going to do. The first player that definitely has to go on a Mount Rushmore of Warrington Wolves playmakers for me is Andrew Johns. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody. I would have to say that I think I was 6 or 7 at the time when I saw him play for us. It was at home against Leeds Rhinos in the playoffs, a game that we won. Apparently he was there the week before. I don't remember that at all. I could be completely wrong on this, but from what I remember as a Wire fan back then, as a kid basically, was some kind of superhero from Australia was coming over to help us out, help out poor little Warrington Wolves as we try and fight to win the grand final, which we'll do eventually, by the way. Mark my words on that one. But some legend of the game, the best in the world, is coming over to help us. And we play against Leeds, and I'm watching, and I'm at an age where I've been watching for a good few years, but I don't understand the game. I don't see it as I see it now. Now, when I started watching the NRL, I could see differences in their game to our game, and it was actually easier for me to start breaking things down and seeing how the game should actually look, which is why I feel confident enough to actually start this channel in the first place, to actually have an opinion on games and teams. So that's how we're here. When I was watching Andrew Johns against Leeds, I didn't really appreciate it enough. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would have loved to have him at their team and would really fully appreciate what kind of expertise and what kind of level of rugby that he could bring to a team. I wish I could have experienced that at the time. But as a kid, I didn't fully understand the intricacies of rugby league. I knew the rules, I knew how everything was played out, I knew the game as a kid, but not as, I'm not going to say an expert, but as a fan that now understands why things are the way they are, why players do what they do, how things impact other things. I just read the game as a child would when I was 6 or 7 watching him play. But what I do remember of Andrew Johns at the time was this ability to just turn everything into gold. Absolutely everything he touched turned to gold. It was mesmerising. But I don't think I truly appreciated it at the time as a kid because, again, as a kid, he was some superhero that was coming over, so this should just be what he does anyway. It shouldn't be a problem. He's coming over to England from Australia, which I know is the far superior league, so this shouldn't be difficult, if that makes sense. So if you think of players now, or players in the last maybe 10 years, that have an ability to make everything they touch turn to gold, I appreciate it more because they might actually be a homegrown player that is now learning to develop into a world-class talent. But Andrew Johns at the time, I think as a kid, I expected him to just do that. So I didn't truly appreciate it. But every other Warrington Wolves fan that had been watching for decades probably just enjoyed watching it thoroughly, going from, well, let's face it, Nat Wood and Lee Briers, who weren't exactly world beaters at the time, to Andrew Johns, who literally was the world's best player. So I wish I could appreciate it more at the time, and I'm sure there were plenty that did. I'm sure my dad loved watching it because he saw it through, his own eyes and saw it in a different way, in a different perspective. But I just couldn't grasp it. So as much as I loved what I saw, I wish I could just kind of perceive him in a different way. And it was almost, for me, just a little bit wasted. Almost. The second player that I need to add to the Mount Rushmore of Warrington Wolves playmakers is, of course, Lee Briers. I'm aware that I just spoke about him in a slightly negative light, but I'm going to move on from that. Now, what I will say, and again, this is my naivety as a young rugby league fan when I was first watching, was, to me, a lot of players were just numbers on the pitch. They were figures on a field. And there were a few times where players did things a bit more consistently that caught my attention. So, for example, Brent Gross was able to break the line a fair few times. When we brought Martin Gleeson in, he was able to break the line a fair few times. Stuart Reardon did it every now and then. Henry Fife-Feely received a few kicks into the corner, diving towards the try line, and scored a fair few tries that way. So that caught my eye as well. But Lee Briers, for a while, as a young, naive rugby league fan, just thought that Lee Briers was there. He just existed, and that's it. He didn't really offer anything. The one thing I remember was the game-winning drop goal against the Leeds Rhinos in, I think, either 2006 or 7 in the playoffs. I think we'd beaten Leeds back-to-back in the playoffs. And Lee Briers got the game-winning drop goal. He'd scored 2 towards the end of the game. And then we eventually lost to Bradford the week after. But it wasn't until 2009 when a Mr. Tony Smith became the head coach of the Warrington Wolves. And suddenly, the way that I saw the game and Lee Briers was just different. There was one moment I realised that Lee Briers was not the same player anymore since Tony Smith came in. Challenge Cup final, 2009 at Wembley Stadium versus the Huddersfield Giants. If I remember correctly, and I'll try and find the clip and post it now, but what I think I remember is second tackle, Warrington Wolves inside our own half, maybe own 20-metre line. Briers receives the ball to the left-hand side of the field. And again, second tackle, firmly in our own half, chips the ball over towards the sideline. Chris Riley runs onto it, and we get an extra 40, 50, 60 metres down the field. In the Challenge Cup final, little Warrington, who hadn't achieved anything for decades, is now in the Challenge Cup final, and Lee Briers, who I'd seen as basically doing nothing for the past few years, just does that from nowhere. That's the kind of player he became in just a few weeks under Tony Smith, making things happen like that. It was marvellous. It was marvellous. And the next few years, 2010, 2011, 2012, I think he was there in 2013. He might have retired that year, can't fully remember. But in those next few years under Tony Smith, he ran everything. He was the engine that made everything tick. I remember multiple times, me and my dad having conversations of, Briers is injured, and we always struggle without Briers. It was a very rare occasion to win a game when Briers wasn't playing. He was the guy. Simple as that. Lee Briers was the guy. The next player to add to the Mount Rushmore of Warrington Wolves playmakers is Chris Sandow. Now, please hold your laughs, because I know people do like to laugh at certain players. But for me, this is speaking from a personal experience, when he joined in 2015, he was nowhere to be seen. He didn't really offer anything. Now, granted, he'd come into a team that, yes, made the playoffs, but we weren't particularly great in 2015, and he was completely new to a system, so I understand that now. The following season, in 2016, Chris Sandow was just unbelievable. One of the best individual performances I'd ever seen throughout the season from anybody was Chris Sandow. And it's been difficult for a lot of players that I've seen ever for Warrington Wolves to match what he was able to do in 2016. Now, granted, he joined with Kurt Gidley as well, or he came in the following year. So we had a spine of Stephen Ratchford in, let's call it his prime, Kurt Gidley, Chris Sandow, and Darryl Clark. That's a hell of a spine. But the amount of plays that he made individually was overwhelming. Given that he was such an agile, quick, short player, Rob Burrow-esque, if you will, he just manipulated defences. And he had a great pass on him as well. That's what, a lot of people might not remember. But he just, again, another player, everything he touched turned to gold. He was exceptional. And it's unfortunate that he wasn't there the following years and all the kind of stuff that went on. But for me, he was special. Truly special. He was also another one of those players that when he was missing, you could tell. Like, it was rough. And especially in the grand final in 2016 against Wigan, he didn't play for at least the first half, possibly the first 60 minutes, because he came on late in the grand final because he was injured. So the idea was that he'd probably come on really late and hopefully change the game. And I think we lost 12-6, I want to say. Or was it 10-4? Something like that. I think it was only a 6-point gap. But he was injured, thrown into the grand final with a bit of a knock, and was kind of forced to make things happen. And even in the Challenge Cup final that we lost against Hull FC in 2016, he still had a really solid game. Broke the line multiple times. I remember there was a point he was clear through, but he was caught, I think, by Jamie Shaw. Because he was quick, but not necessarily quick over 100 metres. The first 20, 30 metres, oh yeah, he was quick. But the rest, not so much. But he was a very special player that offered a hell of a lot in attack. And it is difficult for short players, for small players, to defend against such big guys. I don't ever remember him being a hindrance in defence. I don't ever remember thinking that. But when he touched the ball, Chris Sandow was excellent. The fourth and final player to add to the Mount Rushmore of Warrington Wolves playmakers is somebody that people are going to laugh at again, Blake Austin. So again, hold your laughs, just hold your laughs, because again, this is personal experience. He joined in 2019, and that first half of that first season, everything was just easy for him. Just so unbelievably easy. Everything he did, he just found simple. It was as easy as receiving the ball, typically played on the right-hand side, received the ball, ran towards the line, stepped, and he's through. It was that easy. It happened time and time and time again. You can watch a Blake Austin highlight reel from that first year, second year, third year at Warrington, and he did it over and over and over again. I personally think that a lot of our fans were harsh towards him. People said that he was useless. I think he was excellent. One thing that I'm not entirely happy about, or wasn't entirely happy about at the time, was the fact that I understood that George Williams was linked with us for a while. But it was the fact that Blake Austin was kind of being pushed out in order to make way for George Williams. I personally wasn't happy with that, because I thought that we had an exceptional talent in Blake Austin. Maybe not every year was insanely good, but you could absolutely guarantee that he was going to offer something special. 2 games in particular I can think of and moments against Hull FC. I think he scored 4 tries in a game where we beat them 60-something 4. He just ran the show for us plenty of times. And there was a solo try scored against the Wigan Warriors at Magic Weekend when it was played at Anfield, when Warrington played in that Magic Weekend kit, the white one with the primrose and blue V. It was a nice kit, that. But he had a solo try about 30 metres out, something like that. That was the kind of stuff he did on a very regular basis. So people might be wondering, why am I going from Andrew Johns to Lee Briers to Chris Sandow to Blake Austin on a Mount Rushmore of playmakers? Because what I think we don't appreciate enough as rugby league fans is it's difficult to just break the line. If it was easy, everyone would do it. That's why we rate Jay Field so highly. That's why we rate Bevan French so highly, because they somehow managed to do it on a very regular basis. Andrew Johns did it, well, for a game that I remember, but I remember him just dominating. Lee Briers did it for multiple years. Chris Sandow did it for an entire season, and so did Blake Austin over those 3 years. It is difficult to just break lines. Exceptionally difficult. And it's not given enough praise. As I said, otherwise we wouldn't rate French or Field as highly as we do, because they do it as regularly as they do. But for me, Blake Austin was probably treated a little bit harshly by fans, by the club. And things might not have gone so well for him the last few years in Super League. But for me, in my personal experience, he goes onto a Mount Rushmore of Warrington Wolves playmakers because he had an ability to just manipulate defences on a very regular basis. And that is enough for me. The final thing that I will say before I conclude this yapping session is, if we think of this Mount Rushmore in terms of time, not just of all time, but as a new one comes on, the oldest one needs to leave. So Andrew Johns will leave the mountain top, and a new face will be etched into the mountain. For me, there's someone that is close. They're not there yet, and there's still a little bit of work. But for me, the next one in line is George Williams. He joined in 2021, in the second half of the season, which is what forced Blake Austin out. But in 2022, the first half of the year, he was... Okay, George, if you're watching this, I know you're not, but it was garbage. The first half of 2022 was garbage. I'm sorry, mate, but it was. But the second half of the year was exactly what I would show to somebody if they say to me, why was he picked for the World Cup squad? That's why. Because the George Williams that we knew from when he was in the conversation as one of the best halfbacks in Super League, when he was at Wigan, is what we saw. When he was partnered on that left with Curry, with King and Ashton, he started influencing the game, which is what actually helped us to stay up in 2022. Cut to 2023, he's leading, or at least competing at the top of, the Man of Steel rankings for the first half of the season, until he ends up with some injuries. Now, there were some poor performances in there. I think I do remember an interception to Conrad Hurrell against St. Helens, at St. Helens. But this is what my biggest concern was for George Williams under Darryl Powell. A lot of our attack was pretty much get the ball to Williams, and then either he has to force a pass or break the line. And a lot of the times, he was actually quite successful. And even when he wasn't successful, he still put defences on the back foot. Almost broke through a couple times because we went at teams quite early in the tackle count inside our own half. And Williams has been developing this ability to break the line under the Warrington Wolves. And he's done it plenty of times with Wigan, but we're seeing it more so with Warrington now. And under Sam Burgess, I hope that we get to see it over and over and over again, and then I will have no doubts, no concerns of Andrew Johns coming off the list and George Williams making his way onto it. I think he can do it, but we just need to see a bit more. Unfortunately, after that, Lee Briers will be the next one to move on. And I hope, because I've got a lot of expectations for this kid, and he is a kid, and Wire fans will know who I'm talking about, but for Lee Briers to step off and for someone else to come in, I think there is a bright future for Leon Hayes, and I hope that he is the guy. He can live up to what Lee Briers was capable of. Because for anyone that watches the reserves regularly, I'm not one of those people, but for people that do, they'll know what he can offer. And when I have seen him, the very few times, I think it's twice, I've seen him just in highlights against Huddersfield in 2022, and his first Super League debut home game against St. Helens, he was fine. He was fine. But he was thrown into a scenario where he'd have to kind of control the game. He was replacing George Williams for that game against St. Helens. And his first kick was actually more accurate than I'd seen from the majority of Josh Drinkwater's kicks this last season. It was almost perfect. It almost stopped just in front of the line in the in-goal area. And I hadn't really seen that from Josh Drinkwater. And yet Leon Hayes kind of showed him up in one kick. So to conclude this video, I will say, there are other players that I could have spoken about. You know, Joel Monaghan came in and did some terrific things. Same with Michael Monaghan. We had some great seasons from Brett Hodgson. We had... Who else did we have? I forget his name. Darryl Clark. Darryl Clark has done some insane things over the last few years. And we've certainly missed him when he's not been available. But what I want to know is, if you're a Warrington Wolves fan, who would go into your Mount Rushmore? Who have you seen over the decades and throughout the generations that would be the 4 players that you just think, wow? But not just limited to Warrington Wolves. If you're a fan of any other team, Wigan, Salford, Saints, Batley, Halifax, Dewsbury, who goes onto your Mount Rushmore of players? And then I can learn about some other people as well. So that is going to be it for this video. My rambling session. So thank you for being here if you are still here. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you want to stay up to date with new content, you can subscribe to the channel. And leaving a like on this video would be massively important. But that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching. And I will see you next time.